and thank you for joining. My name is Jennifer Hill, and I'm a biologist at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Conservation Training Center, or NCTC, in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. I coordinate the Native Youth Climate Adaptation Leadership Congress, which is a week-long on-site program for Indigenous high school youth to grow in their leadership skills. Today, we welcome your questions and comments anytime during the broadcast by using the chat feature, or you can email them to broadcast@fws.gov. If we don't get to your comments or questions today, we'll do our best to follow up with you afterwards. Before introducing today's facilitator, I would like to acknowledge that the National Conservation Training Center is located on the unceded ancestral lands of many Indigenous peoples. While we couldn't find a full account, we are aware that many peoples traversed, cherished, and lived on this land. They include the Massawomack, the Haudenosaunee, the Shawnee, and the Delaware. As we learn more about the Indigenous peoples who continue to have a relationship with this land today, we better appreciate the good earth on which we work, live, and learn. We pledge to grow and sustain relationships with Indigenous communities through collaboration on our training, outreach, youth programs, museum exhibits, and more. And we encourage you to do the same with the lands on which you work and reside. Today, Lonix Landry, Norrell Mukwintu will facilitate the broadcast and introduce our speakers. In addition to Lonix facilitating, we send out a request for pre-questions that we'll try to address during the broadcast. Also today, you might notice that our wonderful speakers may have their cameras off for most of the broadcast due to connectivity issues. Thank you for understanding. Now, a little bit about Lonix. Lonix is a citizen of the Norrell Mukwintu Nation and a self-determined Indigenous-minded person. Lonix is the Native Coordinator at Cal Poly Humboldt in the Indian Natural Resources, Science, and Engineering program and in STEM. He's appointed by his tribe to represent the interests of Native Americans in Trinity County as a council member to the North Coast Indian Development Council, founder and director of the federal contract eligible Indian organization, the Intertribal Student Services, and appointed by his supervisor to the County of Humboldt's Planning Commission Board. Lonix has a Bachelor's of Science in Biology and will soon possess a Master's of Science in Natural Resource, Forest, Wetlands, and Wildland Sciences from Cal Poly Humboldt. Welcome, Lonix.
Well, thank you, Jen. And I have to tell you, it's been an honor to work with you for all these years and with all the fine people at the NCTC. I've witnessed and watched the evolution of the Native Youth Climate Adaptation Leadership Congress from all of your fine works and all of our collective contributions. I've watched the campus at the NCTC change its culture in relationship to its connection to the NICALC program and all the different Indigenous folks coming from all parts of the world, really, from our states, Alaska, Hawaii, America, and Samoa, and Guam and beyond. And so it's been a real honor and a pleasure to work with you all. So today our theme is around this term, TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge. And, you know, I think we know that that's not a term that was created by Indigenous peoples. It was an academic term that was created to try to understand and label as best as possible what are those Indigenous folks doing? What have they been doing since time immemorial in managing these landscapes? So as part of the NICALC family, if you will, Jen and the team have asked me to assist in participating in delving into this topic. And it is a topic that is so big and so broad and so immense that we needed more than one session to discuss all the dynamics of it. And as partnering with the NCTC, the Indian Natural Resource Science and Engineering program of Cal Poly Humboldt, I have been running a speaker series, and I do so throughout the semester, throughout our school semesters. And we have kept this conversation going in between the January and February airing and we've had 3 other speakers. Some of the wonderful topics that have been discussed are what happens with all this research data and these wonderful products that happen with this. Other topics that we've discussed is the challenges of being in that space, being in a space between the academic world and then the indigenous world. So there's a lot of different topics that we've gone into in these now 5th week, and we're going to go a little bit further into it. So I'd like to introduce a wonderful colleague and friend from the Nimipu peoples, Sierra Green.
Thank you, Lonix. All can hear me well? Okay, great. Katsiao, Lonix, and Jen, and the whole NCTC staff for pulling this together. Tatsap Ein, that means welcome to all of you who are online with us today. Inamonikwas, Sapokas Witas, Kasliapotipki Sierra Green, Ka Inwas Nimipu. So thank you, Lonix, for introducing me as Nimipu. That is so much of who I am, where I come from, and all the things that I strive to be in my life. And my name, Sapokas Witas, means thing that causes survival. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, and we're all going to brace ourselves as we know best to do. All can see my screen. Negative verbal, yes.
Looking good, looking good.
Okay, right on. So Sapokas Witas, my name there, means thing that causes survival in Nimipu-Timpt, Nez Perce language. And for me, coming into understanding who I am as a Nimipu-Aya, as a Nez Perce woman, I had to learn who I am. What is the name of my spirit? And Sapokas Witas is what came to be. And as I came to get this name, I had to understand what does that mean for me in my academic life, my professional life, my personal life. And so I had to come up, and I encourage all of you to do this as well. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, USGS, everybody has a mission, right? And what is your personal mission, though? And so for me, as a Nimipu-Aya, as a Nez Perce woman, I came up with promoting the protection and healing of our communities and homelands through culture, first and foremost, science, and education, which are all intertwined and can be, you can put Indigenous in front of each of those, you can put Nez Perce in front of each of those, you can put woman in front of each of those. All the different identities that I walk and that I am are embraced within my mission. And this is a beautiful shot of a waterfall that comes down over towards Wallowa, Oregon, into the Wallowa Lake. And so some of you may not know where the heck is this Nimipu-Aya, this Nez Perce woman from. So our homelands are broadly across eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, north central Idaho, into Montana and Wyoming, and even up into Canada. And so our traditional homelands extend to those reaches. And for me, I take advantage of all these places that I have a connection to and a responsibility to, and visit them each year. You know, as our seasons change, we get to go and visit our different places to hunt, fish, and gather all of our relatives that we are responsible to maintain that relationship with them. So I just want to formally, of course, acknowledge the land upon which I am. I have the beauty and grace and honor to be on my own homelands. Almost every day I travel a lot, but when I am home, of course, getting to watch the sunrise in my own homelands, knowing that my ancestors got to see the sunrise come over the same hill for thousands of years. And here I am today getting to see the same beautiful, amazing grace that we're given each day with the sunrise. You can read this formal land acknowledgement that I wrote for my specific courses at the Nez Perce site. So I am faculty at Northwest Indian College in the Native Environmental Science program. So all of you who are on the call today can reflect and think, what is my degree in? What am I an expert in? And it may be fisheries biology, or it may be animal science, or it may be ecology, or all these different degrees that are offered nowadays, right? But at Northwest Indian College, we offer Native Environmental Science. And so very much of our native culture, and at the Nez Perce site, we get to focus on the Nez Perce or the Nimipu culture and our homelands. That's so much integral into our curriculum and what we teach at Northwest Indian College, alongside the Western science of animal biology as we know it in a lab with dissections. A little bit different in our labs, we actually go out and catch the fish. We clean them out. So we also look at the anatomy of the fish while we do that. Then we fillet them and distribute it to our community. A little bit different than these, specimen that come in that you definitely don't want to eat, right? You don't eat things in the lab, but very different because we've been doing this type of science for thousands of years as Nimipu people. And for me, I just love my family so much. But you can see on this left-hand picture, and I'm like one person, I'm one generation. And I was in a conversation, I'll get back to this picture, but I was in a conversation the other day, and the gal said it was like 400 and some odd generations for 6,000 years or something. I was thinking, wow, that's pretty impressive, because the Nimipu people have been dated back to this area where I'm present day located on the Salmon River. Our ancestors were dated back by Western science 16,000 years. You know what was going on 16,000 years, like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and all these massive beings. And here we are dated back to that time. Not only that, our traditional stories tell us about these cataclysmic events that happened, like the Ice Age and the Missoula flood, and all these things that happened that we have stories about that date us back not only 16,000 years, but even further. So with our traditional knowledge and our inhabitants of this land, I mean, some of you might have been married, today's Valentine's Day, maybe you've been married in a relationship for 30 years. Imagine being in a relationship with the land for 16,000 years, or in my mind, 16,000 generations. And you talk about intimate, you're going to know the ins and outs, every intricacy of the canyon, of the blade of grass, of the soil upon which you're walking, the tree, the animal, the bird singing. That's an intimate relationship. I mean, thousands of years of these observations, of these interactions, of these experiences. And for me, what I love the most is the memories. And so on this picture on the left, my auntie, who is here, she is, I think, like 3, maybe 2 or 3 in this picture. And she just turned 50. She just turned 50 years old last year. And this is the picture on the right-hand side. This was a couple years ago. This girl here now, or she's a senior and she's a junior in high school. She now has a baby. But this is at the same place that we went to. My family was fishing at 50 years ago. And here we are with some of the same lineage of these salmon who spawned year after year after year, generation after generation, in the far reaches of north central Idaho, in one of the farthest inland natural run of salmon in the lower 48. And so there's a lot of hatchery fish, which we are grateful for. The Nez Perce tribe has been integral in sustaining the salmon populations inland and throughout the Northwest. But to have a natural run, that my family is the last family to fish this reach of the South Fork of the Salmon River, is to me just, it's always rewarding when we go there to see the memories that are being made. The kids ask and talk about this place all year long. And for us to continue this tradition, continue this relationship, and to go back and visit my favorite, although we're not supposed to have favorites, one of my best friends, my best relatives, Tuftsville Beaver, and going to see what kind of work they've done up there every year. So here's a little bit of idea of who I am and where I come from. This is this dark tan, of course, is the Columbia River Basin. And in this light green is the 1855 treaty, which reduced our homelands to that light green. And then the 1863 treaty with the United States reduced our reservation to this dark green, which is now our reservation still today. Even within that, it's checkerboard. And so we don't have access on private land to the places that our foods and relatives live and grow, and where we sometimes need to access. And sometimes it's sacred places that we, lost during the many initiatives to reduce not only our land size, but also who we are as Nimipu people. I love this picture up here. This is such a prominent place in the stories of who we are as Nimipu people. It's called the Heart of the Monster. And this is actually where the Nimipu people were created. It's a great story, and you can see this kindergarten rendition of the story, the heart, and of course the giant monster. And in there is Itsiaya, the coyote, saving all the other animals by getting swallowed up by the monster, just like all the other animals did, severing the heart and allowing all the animals to escape back to the air for the birds, back to the hillsides for all the animals, into the water for the fish and aquatic species. Our stories tell us of how we came to be in relationship with this land. And from the drops of the blood of this heart, of this monster, the Nimipu people were created. And all segments of the monster were tossed across the lands, creating all these different people that we see now today. And our stories are living. These aren't just something that happened a long time ago, or I really don't like when people call them fables or myths. Legends, I'll take legends, right? Because you always want to be a legend. You know, if you think someone is who's a legend in your mind, like maybe Babe Ruth, right, was a legend. Some of the basketball players nowadays, debatable, but there's legends, right? And across our landscape, there are marks of these legends that still sit on the landscape. And in this, this is an image pulled from one of our language books. We're working really hard to rejuvenate and renew our language. And this place is Ant and the Yellow Jacket. It's a story that lies along our river. And they're fighting over a piece of salmon. Itsiaya Coyote comes along. I've heard the story hundreds of times growing up. Itsiaya comes along, and because they're fighting over the salmon and they don't stop, Itsiaya turns them to stone. And so we still see them engaged right on the banks of the Clearwater River here in Idaho, and to remind us of all the lessons. And of course, I told that story in 2 sentences, but it's a long, drawn-out story with intricate details of what were they fighting over, what time of season was it, who else was present while this was going on. So our stories talk about seasonality. What is part of this story is part of the landscape and is part of the seasons and is part of all the elements: air, fire, land, water, and spirit. And we cannot forget spirit is so much of an element that is often disregarded in some of Western science. So we always honor that. And for me, this was a quote my dad always said while I was growing up. And it was just like one of the things, you know, you hear your dad say. And he always said, "I belong to the land out of which I came. Earth is my mother." And that was an old quote from Tuhuluzu, who was actually present and retreating from the U.S. Army in 1877 when they were trying to put all the Nez Perce, who lived all across their homelands, onto that tiny dark green reservation. And Tuhuluzu said this and was captured saying this in different renditions of what had happened along the 1877 flight from the U.S. Army. I belong to the land out of which I came. Earth is my mother. And so you can imagine living somewhere beautiful. Imagine where you live and it's a beautiful place and you have all these memories there with your family in the short, you know, in our lifetime. But now you think thousands of years, you have this intimate relationship with this place. And now you're being forced to move mountain ranges over to a whole new valley, to a whole new place with different foods, different seasons, different animal relatives present, different plants. And as you're retreating, and all you can think is, I belong to the land out of which I came. Earth is my mother. It's really powerful to think about. And I love this picture here. And I actually dreamt about this the other night. And this is also one of the places where I visited often to receive my name. But this winding river here that you can see, this winding corridor, is actually made from Tuxbull beaver and his tail as he was running away with an ember of fire from the pines who were guarding fire in a cold winter and was not letting any other animal relatives have or access it. And so all the other animals were actually dying off and in danger of freezing that winter until Tuxbull grabbed an ember from the fire and ran all the way from Central Oregon all the way into north central Idaho. And this is the Grand Ronde River, and it leads into the Snake River, which leads into the Columbia River. and the Columbia River goes out to the ocean. So again, all of these stories, there's so much that goes into this story alone and this continued responsibility that Tuxbull beaver has with fire. And I don't have a slide on it, but there's really great studies going on looking at beavers' impact in wildfire areas and how much they actually are preserving the landscape by being there. And so in our ways, when we learn about reciprocal relationships, like once you take something or you're giving something, you are now responsible for that until entirety. And so having knowledge, I'm responsible for it for entirety. Beaver, Tuxbull taking that fire is now continued generations and thousands of years later, still continues to uphold his responsibility to preserve the landscape in areas where wildfire may be a hazard or may ruin landscapes. He's still able to preserve in the best capacity that he can those areas. So there's great studies, ecological Western science studies that show that. And whether or not they know the story about Tuxbull, this is, to me, it's very apparent. Like, of course, beaver's still going to have a relationship with fire thousands of years later because he had the relationship in the beginning to bring fire to the other plants, the other trees, and to the other landscapes. And I love this quote from Dan Wildcat. It comes out of Power and Place, which is a great read if you haven't read it. It's a little academic, but the content in there will really make you reflect in the work that we all do, right? With the lands, with the plants, with the animals, and of course, the communities. So it's not enough to simply collect oral histories, study the language, learn the tool-making procedures, and know the arts and crafts of our Indigenous societies. All of this being done ought to be done, but we must explore experientially living in the world. So we can sit in classrooms, we can do webinars all day, every day, but until we get our hands dirty, our feet on the ground, our poles in the water, our nets to the shores, we are not going to understand the intricate relationship of our ancestors. And I can't attest to that enough. And Lonix and AW and Jen all know that if this was any other day or 2 years ago, especially during COVID, then I'm doing a webinar, you better believe I'm doing it from the mountains at this little point where I can get Wi-Fi service so I can still be out doing all the things. We do these things all year round. It's not just in the summer or the spring, it's during the fall and the winter as well. Our months are tied to our language. Kakital is the springtime, and that's the time when we dig our roots, and I'll show those in a minute. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, you cannot replace that slimy feeling of salmon when you're holding it when you're 5 and 8 years old. You can't replace this family fishing. This is my family, by the way. My family fishing at Tuxbull-Isnima, place of the beaver, the same river that we have fished for thousands of generations. You can't replace that feeling of getting your first deer. That's not his first year. My brother's now 9 and got his first year this year. You can't replace that feeling of lifting a big moose with all your brothers up into the back of your uncle's truck or packing out the elk that you got with your boyfriend. These things cannot be replaced. And having these experiences of digging your roots in the way that we've been taught for thousands of years with a tool, yes, now it's metal, but I'm not using a shovel that's going to disrupt this whole landscape, which we know happens. You use a shovel, it's a different tool that's not actually necessary to dig up the tiny bulb that you'll see I'll pull up in a second. What's really beautiful about this is the springtime, the ground is still damp, the roots are fresh, the seeds I'm tucking back into the ground to plant again, so they will come back next year or the next year. And once I set it all back down, you can't even tell the ground was disturbed. And now I have my root and I go on to the next one. These ways of traditional knowledge cannot be taught in a classroom, cannot be taught in a webinar. They have to be experienced. And it's not to say that natives cannot experience these things, but it's to say that there's been thousands of years of teachings, and it's a process. It's a process that we start learning when we're little. It's a process that we start learning every single day, that we hear the songs, we hear the drum beat, we go to the places and we learn the things. And I just want to close out, and I'll show this quick video and then I'll pass it over to Joanne, but just a little bit of imagery so you can see a little bit of the places that I'm talking about, the people that I'm talking about, the voices of my community, and all the beautiful things that I've been able to learn through my culture, through my upbringing, and most importantly, out with our land. And that can't be replaced. But I do know that there's a lot of questions around bringing TEK into what we do as agency folks, what we do as academics, what we do as all the different profiles that we fulfill within our society. How do we do that? And I encourage everybody, first and foremost, like, come up with your own mission as a person and spend time outdoors and listen and watch and make your own personal observations. Because yes, we have all this Western science, but that intimate knowledge was developed over thousands of years by firsthand observations and passing those on to the next generation. So with that, I'll share this video.
To be Nimipu is to know you feel loved by the earth and you know that you belong here.
It's important to us to keep our connection with Mother Earth, Father Sun, the Creator, the skies and the wind spirits, all these things.
The foods that we gather are all in their own season. A lot of the places that I go are very sacred places, places where my family has gone. It's both sacred and secret. Before there was Safeways or Albertsons, this is all they had.
Our language is the foundation of our culture.
The Nimipu have been of this land for thousands of years.
My name's Carrie Iatatamai Bridget Williamson. My Indian name is Iatatamai. It means voice carrying through the mountaintops. I got it from my great-great-great-grandma.
Inum Titokan Winikt, Pinakwi Tilapt. And that's my Indian name, but kind of like a lonely traveler.
My legal name is Malvina Kilscrow. I'm a direct descendant of Looking Glass.
I'm known as Lukaps. Duplukapsimai is the formal name, and that means that you're governed by the North Star.
We're not all stoic. We have a great sense of humor and laughter, but we're not always portrayed that way. We're portrayed like this. Or more like...
We know our past and continue to honor its teachings.
Just remember where you came from. Remember who you are.
We are known as Nez Perce. We call ourselves Nimipu. Our history is long and is still being written every day.
So with that, I will pass it on, but I just want to pull up this last slide because it's one of my favorite pictures. There's so many great pictures of there of our food, of our places, but this is my 3 times great grandma, Lizzie Cayuse, on the right, and there's me on the left. And I just, you know, I love getting to share in times like this. And I know there's probably a lot of questions on a lot of how do I bring this in? How can I capture this? How can I, you know, incorporate this? And there's a lot of work to be done, right? There's a lot of ways to do that. And it starts with first listening and hearing our stories and reflecting on yourself and building that allyship with those around you. So Katsiayo, thank you for the time, and I will pass it back to Lonix.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sierra. And so without further ado, we have to get to Joanne Bryant. Joanne, please come on and introduce yourself and share your thoughts about this term, TEK.
I said happy Valentine's Day. So first I'm going to begin by introducing myself and then go on to sharing my stories, and really happy to see everybody joining us. My name is Joanne Bryant, and my name is Tutsutai, meaning following grandma's path. This special name was given to me by my uncle Trimble. He shared that when I was a little girl, I was always following Grandma Maggie while she told me stories and showed me of the old ways. My parents are late Kais and Josephine Peter from Arctic Village. My parents raised me and my six siblings. My grandparents are James and Maggie Gilbert on my father's side and Titus and Annie Katz on my mom's side. My tribe is Nitsayguchan, Athabascan, originally from Arctic Village, which is located about 300 miles north of Fairbanks and nested in the range. I like to acknowledge the lower Tanana Athabascan tribe too, meaning straight water, for being on their homeland, and thanking them for their unique stewardship of this wonderful valley, Fairbanks, Alaska, in which I reside. My home is Fairbanks with my best friend Robert and our 4 wonderful birds, Lulu, Honey, Carly, and Tiny Tim. I just love my birds. I am the Tribal Communication and Outreach Specialist for Alaska Region Office of Communication, formerly known as External Affairs, Fish and Wildlife, and been with the service for 23 years and continue to love working with Crystal and making a difference in Alaska. I will share with you about traditional knowledge in Native society as it relates to wildlife conservation and how the Gwich'in culture and traditional way of life represent strong community ties by the people who woven their skills and knowledge for basic necessity and survival perspective. I was born and raised with very little outside influence in a very remote Arctic village and was taught to speak my language at age 3. I was speaking Gwich'in at school and English, I was speaking Gwich'in at home and English at school, so I am a fluent speaker. I read, write, and translate Gwich'in language. I grew up traditionally with parents and grandparents teaching me about the subsistence way of life, survival skills, language, culture, Gwich'in heritage, and simply how to make Indian ice cream. These are the basic methods and necessity for survival. Back then, it was all about survival in the village through hunting, fishing, and gathering. But the people also took care of each other with great respect. Back in the 1960s, there were limited transportation for passengers and supplies. The airplane comes every 6 months or so, or some men would take a week-long dock for income. So we have to ration our supplies. I watch Mom put a pinch of sugar in a tea and neatly put the sugar away for safekeeping. And it's just not the sugar, but all of our foods. We have to take very good care of it. So during my birth, there was no airplane, so I was born naturally in a single bedroom log cabin with no running water or electricity, with only a wood stove for heat. Back then, there was no medicine, but we had 8 very experienced midwives who took care of me and my mom. Having been born in the village, Mom and others have to endure the pain of childbearing, but also take responsibility, taking care of large families. Raising children is a shared responsibility by the parents and grandparents. Hunting, trapping, fishing, and wood hauling is a Gwich'in men's job. After the hunter harvests the animal, they put a tree branch or willow on the ground, and the men place the meat onto the branches to keep the meat in the area clean. They make sure the blood is clean as much as possible so as not to scare other animals away. The stomach and guts are a delicacy and are given to the elders for nourishment and medicine. Delicacy food are considered like a medicine because we are so used to eating from the land and being healthy. It is Gwich'in's women's job to take care of the meat. Native women display great strength to wash, cut, hang meat, and keep the smoke going in the smokehouse so the cows won't disturb the dry meat, and the meat aroma is of smoke. It is their role to clean, preserve, and cook the meat. They are not allowed to hunt with their spouse because it is considered a taboo. After the hunt, the meat and skin is taken to the cache, smoke cache. And the women cut the meat and work on the skin. The skin is really tough and excess fat is removed. It is stretched out with all the necessary skin tanning tools. The men hunt and trap, and the women prepare the meat and skin. Gwich'in women are not allowed around hunters and animals during their menstrual period because it is considered bad luck or taboo. Back in the early 1900s, when a woman has her period, she is placed in a tent for 1 month with a big decorative hat to cover her face. She is not to communicate with anybody but sit in the corner quietly and sews. This is to make sure she gets a clear complexion and is purified. The Gwich'in people are very strict in following these protocols of rules. This is for survival purposes. Women take care of animals after harvest, such as muskrat, ground squirrel, and rabbit. The hunters take care of these fur bearers, such as wolves and lynx. Once the hide is removed and dried on the board, the women sews hat and gloves from the fur. Very seldom during lean times, a woman would harvest small animals such as ground squirrel, muskrat, or rabbit. Fishing is considered appropriate for both men and women, especially fishing in the ice or throwing lures in the river. The Gwich'in women are not considered leaders, but they stand behind their spouses and they give their love and support. They consider themselves leaders because of all the work they do. I recall my mom always sew beads, and Dad was always wearing decorative beaded vests, slippers, parkas, canvas boots. I also recall Mom had an iron on the stove, and she would iron Dad's National Guard uniform, and Dad sure looks slick. It was behind these hard-working hands and down-to-earth Gwich'in women that make the men look sharp. These are just few examples where Gwich'in women have their own leadership roles and provided for their families. These Gwich'in practices are still very much alive, and the traditional knowledge continue on. Masi Cho.
Well, thank you, Joanne. That was great to learn a bit about the Gwich'in culture and things that are happening. So let's get to a few questions. And Joanne, since we got you on at the moment, let me ask you a couple of these questions. One of them is, I'm just going to read it. I'm interested in learning more about traditional ecological knowledge that is specific to my geography ecotype. Where can I find more information? And since you're in Alaska, we're going to say, Joanne, for your particular ecotype,
so
the questioner wants to know where they can find more information.
Okay, I am always sharing my broader Gwich'in culture and language, and not the details of it, because you have to go to the village to learn more about it. I spend a lot of time with my elders as well. They are a walking encyclopedia, and they will share with you the many stories, teach you hands-on, and they are the gentlest people. I just love my elders, and that's where I get all my information.
Awesome. And then there's another question, Joanne, and I think we're going to stay with you for this one. And okay. The question is, how is Indigenous knowledge used in the field today, and how can the knowledges be used for wildlife conservation?
So I'm going to share a story about how my dad talked to the bear in Guchen to make it go away. So one hot summer afternoon, Dad was home playing his fiddle. He's a fiddler. And in comes running one of the local women. She was so scared, and Dad asked her, "What's going on?" And she said, "There's a big brown bear near the airport, and we don't know what to do." Dad said, "Whatever you do, don't shoot it." So he got on his four-wheeler and drove to the airstrip and finally found a big brown grizzly bear. We call it Shok. It was feeding on the blueberries. And that was quite a distance away from the bear. He wanted to make sure that that is the only bear around, and he didn't want anybody to shoot the bear. Because in our culture, we don't eat bear meat because they are considered like human beings, because they have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. But we do use the fur. So he started talking to the bear, and the bear turned its head and listened. That's it, really loud in Guchen language. "Bear, go away now, you're scaring the people." This was a moment. There was an interaction and connection between the bear and the Guchen man. They understood each other. Elders say the bear understands the Guchen language. So after Dad yelled at the bear a couple more times, it went to the direction of the mountain and was never seen again. TEK is appreciated and honored in my Guchen culture, and the biologists respect the TEK as well. I just want to say Masi Cho. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Joanne. And I would add to some of that. And Joanne hit it the best, but there definitely is no one-stop shop to access this information. It has to do with relationships. The entire thing about this concept is all rolls back to relationships. Relationships with the landscape, relationships with people who have a really strong relationship to the landscape. I think that's what we're getting at. So it's really hard for one single term like traditional ecological knowledge to represent all those concepts and how everything is connected and related. So Sierra, we had some questions for you as well. We'll start with a few softballs here. Why is cultural competence as a skill important if you want to listen and access the knowledge that Indigenous people have?
Yeah, thank you to whoever asked that question, because I'm sure there's others who also think about this. And so I'm going to be as native as possible and I have to answer in a story, right? I have to answer in a story. So working with the U.S. Forest Service is something that I did some community organizing, and I wanted to bring our folks, our tribal members, out to different places on our homelands, look at our different elements, but I also wanted to have our community input from the Nez Perce Tribe Natural Resources Departments and outside entities like the U.S. Forest Service, the Idaho Fish and Game, the National Park Service. So there are various entities involved in this, and it was really like 3 woven parts together to make this beautiful braid of knowledge around each of these elements. Whether it was water we were talking about, we brought in water folks from all those different entities. If it was fire, we brought in fire folks. But what we did on this fire day was, yes, we had an elder talk about fire. Of course, I shared about Tuxtable and fire. We went to the Nez Perce Tribe's fire and forestry management, and they showed us some of the things that they're working on using drones, managing our homelands, our reserves, and why it's important to do so, looking at wildfire maps and all these things. And what we did at the end of this with the Forest Service was we took them way up into the mountains where they're responsible for the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest. And we showed them the plants that we dig for our medicine, that we use in our sweat, that we use to heal people. We gave them the tukis, the digging stick, to show them how to dig it. We allowed them to dig it, to go wash it off in the cold water of the creek nearby, to take that home, to remember the importance of that day. From that day forward, we have done place name initiatives with the U.S. Forest Service We are changing the way that the forest is managed through community conversations. And all of it ties back to them coming in open-minded and saying, we're not the experts here. We're coming as one of the strands necessary to understand this landscape. So with the tribal community, the tribe itself, and our outside agency partners all coming together, and as a community organizer, very clearly made sure everybody understood, like, you're not running the show, you're not running the show, you are participating, all of us are coming together at the same level of participation. And I think that's just a big part of the cultural competency is, we're not coming in here to teach anybody anything. We're all coming here to learn together. And everybody can bring their authentic self. They don't have to come in as superintendent of the Forest Service. Like, you come in as Miss whoever, you come in as Mr. whoever, and just come and be and learn. And having that shared space and that shared experience around ceremony really help people let their guards down and let their curiosity elevate to places where they felt safe enough to ask questions, and knowing that it wasn't coming from a place of appropriation, but as an authentic curiosity to, how can I better understand this to do my job better? And I think that's at the core of cultural competency, is really understanding and building the relationship of who you're working with authentically, as a sisterhood, as a brotherhood, as a family, on this landscape. We all love and appreciate this place that we're at. How are we going to work together to take care of it?
Thank you. A couple quickies too for you, Sierra. Was the elder woman in your video with the young woman, the young girl, were they picking choke cherries?
Yes.
And there was a question on, and then what are they going to do with them to process that fruit?
Very good. Choke cherries was one of our traditional foods. So it's served at our longhouse, our ceremonial meals. They're served just raw individually. And so a lot of people actually can them nowadays to preserve them all throughout the season. But historically, they would have been dried. And of course, you can mash them up, remove the seed. Although, Western science says the seeds are toxic, don't eat them. But in our ways, like, it's good to have a couple seeds once in a while to help your digestive tract, your microbiome. I mean, all these things it's not anything new. Of course, if you eat it in large quantities is when you become ill from it. But, choke cherries, for me personally, I love to get some of the dried, push it down into a paste, put it on a nice little piece of salmon, and then have some of our other foods below that. And you get this like nice little sweet, tart fish bite that's just, you got to be there, right? You got to experience it. I can't explain it to you. There's no smell-o-vision, taste-o-vision. So it's a great treat.
And to that question as well, I had some choke cherry syrup on my pancakes last week. So that was a good way, and a great gift from some of our folks up in the Anishinaabe and Ojibwe country. So the other one, Sierra, for you, from Carrie from Oahu, was wanting to know how we can get a hold of you and continue some of these conversations.
Yeah, so I do wear many hats. I'm faculty. I also work for a national association, the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. So I'm going to refer back real quick to that question of, how do I learn more about this? Cultural tourism is taking off like we've never seen before. And so if you're interested in learning more about the ecotypes and the people of those areas, look to cultural tourism in your state or your region. Tribes are really elevating their stories by telling it themselves. And so that's a great way. But to get in contact with me, maybe we can shoot Jen an email and Jen can connect us. I'll say that. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I do look forward to talking with you.
All right. So I have some burning thoughts and things that I've picked up on and gotten better. One is that instead of referring to this term as traditional ecological knowledge, I feel that all of my speakers and the folks who I've engaged with over this process, they tend to prefer indigenous knowledge, indigenous science, indigenous understandings. TEK is not something that really came has come out of Indian country, but indigenous knowledge, indigenous science certainly has. So a question, you know, some of us understand that, hey, we need to share these things, or come from the opinion that we need to share these things to help our world get right in the face of climate change, in the face of the way some of our dominant society philosophies and where that's leading us. Money, 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 corporate personhood, and all that type of business. So there's a yearning with some indigenous folks that are like, hey, we need to share this stuff. We need to share this indigenous knowledge to help save the planet and to preserve it from being lost, versus the flip side of that is, oh, hey, wait a minute. Now don't be sharing too much, because we need to protect the last resources from exploitation by the newcomers in dominant society. And I suppose when I mean by resources, I mean our intellectual knowledge, as well as the natural resources that come from the spaces that our peoples inhabit. For both of you, if you have, how do you deal with that dynamic? Save the planet, preserve this cultural practice, versus we have to protect it from being exploited. Sierra, let's start with you.
Okay, yeah, and I absolutely, this isn't the first time the question's been asked, right? And in thinking about tourism or education or any of the levels of sharing knowledge, don't share too much. And to me, I really, I guess, struggle with that a bit, because the way I was taught was, if somebody wants to learn, you teach them. But, it's like, for hunting, let's start with hunting. Like, oh, just because somebody wants to hunt, you don't hand them a gun and point them in the direction of the deer, right? First, they got to start out with a slingshot and maybe a bird that they're never going to hit, and you work your way up into the depths of knowledge, into the depths of experience, into the depths of responsibility. And so that's, in our way, it's a progression of learning. You don't just walk in one day and become a head cook at the longhouse. You have to learn the plants intimately. You have to be able to gather enough to take care of the people, and learn to process and learn all these things along the way before you can, access the next level of knowledge of maturity. There's young women who are younger than me who have more knowledge than I do, because they were raised differently and, had access to that knowledge because they had met these kind of landmarks, throughout their learning and their maturity. So, it's just like school. You don't just like jump right into physics in kindergarten. You got to crawl before you walk. You got to really learn the ways before you can access the knowledge. And the main thing is, like, once you have access to it, once you have the knowledge, or once you have that experience, you are now responsible. And I think a lot of people, I want to know all this, but you better be ready to be responsible for that. If you learn the water song of our people, you better be ready to protect that water to all ends. And so you maybe don't want that until you're ready for that knowledge. You're on mute.
Thank you. And so, Joanne, along those same lines, sometimes our university partners and or our federal agency partners may want different things than our tribes or our cultural practitioners desire and want from the products of this understanding. Do you have any words of wisdom around that, Joanne, in regards to the tribe or a cultural practitioner's wants and desires for understanding or knowledge versus a university or federal agencies?
Wow, that's a big question. So Crystal and I were currently with others as well that we're trying to just use indigenous knowledge, just because we've been having long chats about that. And then also, I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question or not, but I'm just, when I share with Fish and Wildlife and others about my Gwich'in culture. I don't share everything because a lot of the stories, the hunting, the fishing, all this stuff, it belongs to my people. And a lot of time, there's, like locations and just different stuff like that I don't share. And, one time my uncle said, or tried to use flints, the tip of their arrows. And he said he knows where they're at on the mountain. And he even showed me the location, but he said, this information belongs to the Gwich'in people. Don't share it with anybody else. And so that's how, that's just one example. And so that's how, when I share about my culture, I get permission from the people, the elders, before I share. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or not.
You were right on point, Joanne. That was perfect.
Cool.
That was exactly the type of question that I didn't ask very well, but you knew what to share.
Cool.
So I have another one in this will be our last question. I see Jen arriving here. So Sierra, some of our colleagues would not participate due to not feeling appropriately compensated. What's some of your thoughts on that, and how that kind of all boils down to share or not to share? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I know for me in these conversations, I feel like and even mentioning like there's these girls in our community who are younger than me who have more knowledge. I don't always feel like I'm the appropriate one because there's an elder, there's somebody else in line who maybe could share better or is more poised or more positioned to share. And at the same time, like I would expect for them to have more compensation. When I work with elders, I have a base pay that I have for them. And that's important because, it's like paying someone with a high school degree and somebody with 5 PhDs, that's kind of taking the measure. But at the same time, in our way, when you're asked to do something and you're able, you usually don't say no, because you've been asked for a reason. And, Haniwat, the creator, puts you in places to share your light. And it goes back to that spirit that's so much a part of, what drives me. And I pray before I say yes to things, and I pray and say, is this my position? Is this my place? Or do I need to recommend somebody else? Or, to really see how things pan out. So for me, it's nice to have compensation. This is not part of my work as faculty or part of my work as in tourism or part of my work in anything besides Sepoka Sweetness. I'm passionate about sharing who I am, in hopes that everybody can understand better of who they are and their place in this world that we all share. We're only here for a fraction of time. There's probably never going to be a place or time that we're all together again. A great memory, learning that at NICALC, and, really just honoring the time that we do get to spend together. So I appreciate the opportunity. And of course, I'm always here to talk everyone's ear off if I'm given a moment to. So Petsiaya.
Thank you, Joanne and Sierra, for sharing space with us. Jen, we hand it back over to you.
Thank you all, Lonix, Sierra, Joanne. Really appreciate you spending your time with us today and your sharing your expertise and knowledge, your experiences. I know that these are short broadcasts and we're trying to address very complex thoughts, but I'm hoping that by participating in the broadcasts, participants will learn a little bit, but also better appreciate these snippets of knowledge that have been shared with them, and become more curious. So that's what I hope that we can gain by doing these. And we just thank you for your time. We thank all the participants for joining. I do want to encourage folks to try to join next month, Wednesday, March 15th at 3 p.m. We'll be hearing from the Environment for the Americas and learning about the programs they do to support Indigenous youth, getting into the work field or exploring their passions in life. And as a reminder, each broadcast is recorded and available on NCTC's website. If you wish to learn more about this broadcast or any broadcast or to be added to the listserv, please just email me, Jennifer_Hill@fws.gov. It's also in the chat. And we just thank everyone for your time today.
We can serve it so we can eat it.